The first thing I saw wasn't my 75-year-old mother. It was her glasses, lying shattered on the diner floor. Coffee was still dripping off an overturned mug. Every customer sat perfectly still. Nobody spoke. Nobody even looked at the front door. Then I saw my mother slowly pushing herself up from the floor, one hand pressed against her cheek. A man in an expensive suit laughed as he tossed a $20 bill onto the counter. "That should cover it," he said. Everyone let him walk away. Everyone, except me, because he had just humiliated the woman who raised me. And he had absolutely no idea. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I didn't spend 26 years commanding Army Rangers to be impressed by bullies. I spent them learning exactly how to stop them without ever throwing the first punch. My name is Rebecca Turner. For 26 years, I wore the United States Army uniform. The last 7 of those years, I had the privilege of commanding Army Rangers, men and women who understood that real strength wasn't measured by how hard you could hit someone. It was measured by how calmly you protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Retirement was supposed to be quiet. After decades of deployments, command briefings, and endless responsibility, I came home to the only place that had ever truly felt like home. Ashbrook, a small Midwestern town where everyone waved at strangers. Church bells still mattered on Sunday mornings, and my 75-year-old mother, Margaret Turner, had spent nearly 4 decades serving breakfast before sunrise. Turner's Diner wasn't famous. It didn't have fancy menus or celebrity visitors. It had chipped coffee mugs, homemade apple pie, and the kind of kindness that couldn't be bought. Truck drivers planned their routes around it. Teachers stopped in before school. Police officers drank coffee there every morning. If someone couldn't afford a meal, my mother quietly found a way to make sure they never left hungry. She never kept score. She simply believed that dignity was worth more than money. Every morning at 6, she'd unlock the front door herself. Every evening she'd wipe every table before heading home. No matter how many times I offered to help more, she'd smile and say the same thing. "Sweetheart, this diner kept us alive after your father passed. As long as I can still stand, I'll keep these doors open." That Tuesday started like every other. I was repairing the fence behind my house when my phone buzzed. It wasn't my mother. It was Emily, one of the college students who waited tables at the diner. She rarely called. When I answered, all I heard was crying. "Rebecca." Her voice shook so badly, I almost couldn't understand her. "You need to come, please." "What happened?" "It's your mom." The line went silent. I didn't ask another question. 8 minutes later, I pulled into the diner's parking lot. Something felt wrong before I even stepped out of the truck. Half the parking spaces were full. Customers stood outside instead of eating. Nobody spoke. They just stared toward the entrance. Inside, the coffee pots were still brewing. Half-eaten breakfast sat untouched. A chair had been knocked onto its side. My mother was sitting behind the counter with an ice pack against her cheek while Emily knelt beside her. The moment she saw me, she forced a smile. "I've had worse days." She always tried to make other people feel better. Even now, I knelt beside her. "What happened?" She looked away. Emily answered instead. It was Victor Kane. The name was familiar. A wealthy local developer. Owned construction companies. Commercial properties. Half the empty buildings downtown had his name on them. People said he could make problems disappear with one phone call, or create new ones just as easily. "He came in with 3 men," Emily whispered. "They were bothering one of the new waitresses. They kept making rude comments. Your mother asked them to stop." I looked around the diner. Every customer suddenly became interested in their coffee cups. Nobody met my eyes. Emily continued. "He laughed. Said he could do whatever he wanted. Your mom told him everyone follows the same rules in this diner." Emily swallowed hard. Then, her voice cracked. "He struck her." The room became even quieter. Not one person interrupted. Not one person corrected the story. Because everyone already knew. My mother placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "It's over." "No," Emily whispered. "It isn't." An older man finally spoke from the corner booth. "I wanted to help." He stared at the floor. "But Victor owns the shopping center. where my son's business rents. Another customer shook his head. He threatened people before. Nobody wants to end up on his bad side. Fear. That was what I was looking at. Not weakness. Fear. The kind that spreads through an entire town until decent people convince themselves silence is safer than courage. I helped my mother stand. Do you want to press charges? She sighed. I just want everyone to go home safely. That answer sounded exactly like her. Always thinking about everyone else. As I walked her toward the office, a teenage dishwasher quietly stepped beside me. Without saying a word, he slipped a folded diner receipt into my hand. His fingers were trembling. Then he hurried back into the kitchen before anyone noticed. I unfolded the receipt. 6 words were written across the back in blue ink. He has done this before. That little diner receipt stayed in my pocket all night. 6 words. He has done this before. In the army, anonymous information was never enough. It was a lead. Nothing more. If I wanted justice for my mother, assumptions wouldn't help me. Facts would. The next morning, I arrived at Turner's Diner before sunrise. Mom was already pouring coffee, as if nothing had happened. The bruise on her cheek was darker now. Customers kept stopping to ask if she was okay. She smiled at every one of them. I'm tougher than I look. That was my mother. She refused to let one cruel man steal the kindness she'd spent decades building. After breakfast rush slowed, I sat down with Emily. I need everything, I said. Not just yesterday. She hesitated. Then she nodded. It started about 2 years ago. She explained that Victor Kane visited several local businesses every few weeks. Restaurants, hardware stores, a bakery. Sometimes he demanded free meals. Sometimes he insulted employees. Sometimes he threatened owners who refused special treatment. Most people stayed quiet, not because they respected him, because they feared what would happen if they challenged him. I wrote down every business she mentioned, every date she remembered, every employee who had witnessed something. By noon, I had filled 6 notebook pages. The next stop was the diner's security office. The front camera clearly showed Victor entering. It showed customers arriving. It showed delivery trucks. But when I reached the exact time Emily described, the screen went black. 3 minutes. Nothing. Then the picture returned. Someone had disabled the recording. I frowned. That wasn't an accident. I walked outside. Across the street sat an old pharmacy. Its entrance faced the diner's parking lot. I introduced myself to the owner, Mr. Collins. He recognized me immediately. Margaret's daughter. I nodded. I need a favor. Without asking another question, he led me to his office. His cameras covered half the street. The footage wasn't perfect, but it showed Victor leaving the diner, laughing. One of his friends slapped him on the shoulder while they joked. Nobody looked frightened. Nobody acted surprised. They behaved like men who believed there would never be consequences. Mr. Collins sighed. Rebecca, I've seen that man scare people for years. Why didn't anyone report him? He looked embarrassed. Some did. What happened? The complaints disappeared. That answer bothered me more than I expected. Disappear? Complaints weren't supposed to disappear. They were supposed to become records. That afternoon I visited every business Emily had mentioned. Some owners refused to speak. Others quietly admitted they had paid for damaged property rather than argue with Victor. One waitress showed me a cracked phone she'd thrown away after he smashed it during an argument nearly a year earlier. Another owner admitted Victor had threatened lawsuits whenever anyone mentioned calling the police. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. This wasn't one terrible afternoon. It was years of intimidation. Years of people convincing themselves silence was easier than standing together. Late that evening, I received an unexpected phone call. The voice belonged to David Morales, a retired police lieutenant. I'd met him years earlier during a veterans charity event. I heard about your mother, he said. I wish I could tell you I'm surprised. We met at a quiet coffee shop. David stirred his coffee without drinking it. Victor always stayed just inside the line. What do you mean? He intimidated. He pressured. He settled disputes with expensive attorneys. Most victims eventually gave up. Were reports filed? Some. Were charges proven? Rarely. He leaned forward. But yesterday? This time there are witnesses. As I stood to leave, David stopped me. Rebecca, don't lose your temper. I won't. I learned a long time ago that anger wins battles. Truth wins wars. The following morning, someone knocked on my front door. It was the teenage dishwasher from the diner, the same one who had slipped me the receipt. He looked nervous. I didn't tell you everything. He handed me a small flash drive. My cousin delivers groceries downtown. He was parked outside when it happened. He recorded part of it on his phone because Victor was yelling so loudly. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The video wasn't dramatic. There was no graphic violence. But it captured something far more important. Victor shouting. My mother's calm voice asking him to respect her employees. Customers sitting frozen. And the moment afterward, when he walked outside laughing loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Clear. Unedited. Time-stamped. For the first time since this began, I knew the truth no longer depended on memories. It existed on video. Then my phone buzzed with a local news alert. Victor Kane announces campaign for mayor of Ashbrook. I looked at the headline, then slowly closed my laptop. Because at that exact moment, a complete evidence file was already on its way to investigators. And by the time Victor stepped onto his first campaign stage, he had no idea the story everyone feared telling was finally about to be heard. The evidence left my hands on a Thursday morning. After that, I waited. One thing the Army teaches you is that once the mission begins, impatience becomes the enemy. You trust preparation. You trust facts. And eventually, the truth catches up. By Friday afternoon, Ashbrook was changing. Not because of rumors. Because people had finally stopped whispering. The local investigators contacted Emily. Then Mr. Collins from the pharmacy. Then the retired lieutenant. By the end of the weekend, nearly a dozen witnesses had agreed to provide formal statements. One after another. People who had stayed silent for years finally realized they weren't standing alone anymore. The delivery driver's video became the turning point. It wasn't dramatic. There were no special effects. No angry speeches. Just clear evidence of exactly what happened. For the first time, the story belonged to facts instead of fear. Monday morning brought another surprise. Victor Kane held a press conference to announce his campaign for mayor. Only a handful of reporters showed up. Most of them had already seen the evidence. Instead of asking about campaign promises, they asked about the diner, about the witnesses, about the growing investigation. His confident smile slowly disappeared. The man who had always controlled the conversation suddenly couldn't control a single question. Within days, several business organizations publicly suspended their partnerships with his companies until the investigation concluded. Campaign donors quietly withdrew their support. His own advisors encouraged him to step away from the race. No one had threatened him. No one had shouted at him. People had simply seen the truth. Meanwhile, Turner's Diner looked different. Not because the building had changed. Because the parking lot was full. Customers arrived from neighboring towns after hearing what had happened. Some came for breakfast. Others came just to shake my mother's hand. Many left handwritten notes beside the cash register. Asterisk, thank you for standing up for people. Asterisk. Asterisk, kindness still matters. Asterisk. Asterisk, we're with you. Asterisk. Mom read every single one. Then she tucked them into an old recipe box she'd kept since I was a child. Emily walked over one afternoon carrying 2 fresh slices of apple pie. I wanted to thank you. I smiled. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. She looked toward the dining room. Before this happened, I thought courage belonged to soldiers. She shook her head. Now I know it belongs to ordinary people who decide they're tired of being afraid. Those words stayed with me, because she was right. The Rangers I commanded were extraordinary professionals. But courage had never belonged only to the military. Sometimes courage looked like a 75-year-old woman calmly defending a young waitress. Sometimes it looked like a frightened teenager passing someone a folded receipt. Sometimes it looked like witnesses choosing honesty after years of silence. A month later, Investigators announced that Victor Kane would face multiple legal proceedings related to several incidents uncovered during the investigation. His mayoral campaign officially ended before the first public debate. I never celebrated. I never called him. I never even saw him again. There was nothing left to prove. Justice had arrived without anger. Exactly the way it should. One quiet evening, after closing time, Mom asked me to help hang an old family photograph behind the counter. It showed my father, wearing his work apron, my mother beside him, and me, barely 10 years old, holding a plate that was almost bigger than I was. She stepped back and smiled. It belongs here. I nodded. It always did. She poured us each a cup of coffee. The diner was silent except for the old wall clock. After a few minutes, she looked at me. I always knew you'd come home. I laughed softly. I just wish it had been sooner. She reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. The army taught you how to lead. But your father taught you something even more important. What's that? She smiled. Real strength isn't making people fear you. It's making them feel safe. I looked around the little diner that had survived another storm, at the people still laughing over coffee, at the waitresses no longer looking over their shoulders, at my mother, finally smiling without pretending. And I realized something. Bullies think power comes from intimidation. But real power begins the moment ordinary people stop being afraid and choose the truth instead.